I live in a fairly small town, so small that we don't even have a Walmart or even a four-way traffic light, but it's still my town and I treasure it above all others. I've lived here all my life, and I can say that the only thing that has really grown since I can remember is the local cemetery. Garden of Heaven, they call it. I guess if I wanted to spend eternity anywhere, it would be in one with a name as nice as that. Anyway, the cemetery has always been pretty crowded, even when I was a kid, so much so that there was barely room when we buried my dad. I remember someone joking that you'd have to break his back so they could bend him over and fit him in the ground. A joke that was certainly no laughing matter. My dad's death had major repercussions in my life. I won't go into too much detail about it, but I was little, and it affected me more than I care to admit. The thing is, a few years after that I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, and wanting to be noticed and fit in with this group of bad boys. I ended up picking up the trowel from the principal's office more times than I can count. But no matter what I did, it was still almost impossible to impress this group of guys, James, Malcolm, and Tom, the Three Musketeers, as they like to call themselves. Actually, there used to be 4 of them, but Rob had left the group a while ago. I always saw them skipping class and running off to buy cigarettes at the corner store. I was jealous, wishing I could be as brave as they were. He didn't really know it at the time, but Malcolm's dad was dating his teacher and he knew it, so he blackmailed her with this. We can do whatever we want, and you won't say anything because if you do, everyone will know what you have with my dad. He told the teacher one day. Malcolm was a bit of a jerk, but I was young and dumb, so I wanted to be like him and his friends. So of course I would find a way to get them to accept me. One day I found a way to skip class and meet them. "Hey guys," I said nervously that first day, as I ducked into the gym after breakfast to wait for them. Tom laughed immediately when he saw how red my face was. "Look at you. You look like the daddy of all tomatoes. What the fuck? Did you run all the way down here as soon as the recess bell rang?" asked James. I might be cruel, but I was supposed to take the hit and prove I was a tough guy, so I nodded and said, "I didn't even bother to come in for the first shift." They looked at each other with raised eyebrows and sharing a sort of knowing gesture that I couldn't quite decipher at the time. "What's your name?" asked James. "Steven," I said. "But you can call me Steve." "Well, Steve, if you really want to be part of the Musketeers, you have to prove that you deserve to be here," James said with a sort of twinkle in his eye. "Come to Sky Garden tonight after curfew. If you can get there and finish our challenge, you'll officially be a member of our team." "How am I going to sneak away from my mom?" I asked. "That's not our problem. You have to be there by 8:30 or the deal is off," Malcolm decided. I told him I would, and it turned out that getting out of the house was the easiest part of the night. My mom ended up having to work a double shift, so only my sister was watching me. I told her I'd give her $20 if she didn't say I went out to where I was. "Where are you supposed to go?" she asked when I passed her the money. "I'm just going to go smoke some weed at the cemetery," I lied to play macho as I grabbed a coat. Running through the city in the middle of the night was exhilarating. Only a few streetlights were on and the cemetery felt like it was eclectic and full of spirits when I arrived. The way the moon cast its light on the tombstones was eerie and creepy, but somehow sinister. It was also beautiful. I had arrived there shortly after 8 o'clock and thought surely the trio had abandoned me, but instead they emerged from behind one of the larger mosques, probably one of those built before the war. James whistled softly when he saw me, and Malcolm muttered something that Tom thought was funny because he started laughing. "Wow, Steve, I didn't think you'd have the balls to come." "You see, I did, and in plenty of time. So what are we going to do here?" James gave his colleagues this mischievous grin and said, "We're here to see if you're up to the challenge and can fit in with our team, so we've prepared a series of 3 challenges for you to do. If you can do all 3 before time runs out, you will become a musketeer." "Okay, I'm sure I can do anything, buddy." I wanted to sound confident and sure of myself. James grinned mischievously, while Malcolm and Tom seemed to be holding back laughter. "I'll do it." "Which one's first?" Tom pointed towards the gravestones. "You know how this cemetery is pretty big. It has tons of graves, and well, Tonight, those graves are the safe zone and the ground is like lava. You have 5 minutes to jump from here to the end of the plot without touching the ground." "Done," I said determinedly. The trio laughed and ran to the other side of the tombstones, leaving me in place, and once they were there, they called my name, and the game began. I stood at the edge of the mausoleum trying to decipher which way to go through the graves. Then I started jumping over them, taking long strides, hoping I wouldn't fall. I will admit that I said a prayer to Jesus and asked for forgiveness for disrespecting the deceased in that way. I remember when Dad died, I had actually danced on another grave and Mom warned me never to disrespect the spirits like that. "You'll pay for it if you do, in this life or the next," she told me that time. As I jumped toward the next tombstone, part of the old relic crumbled, and I couldn't help but ponder her words. What if she was right and I really was awakening a curse by making a jerk of myself? Then I heard the trio shout excitedly as I almost fell on the grass, and it made my determination to win grow stronger. I had to prove I could be the best, so I kept going. I made it to the other side in about 4 minutes, jumping off the last tombstone and even managing to do a backflip to where they were standing. "Whoa, that was great," James admitted, although the other two didn't look too happy that I'd passed the test. I should have wondered if they ever really intended for me to pass it in the first place. Beginner's luck. The challenge was easy anyway. Anyone could pass it, Malcolm said as he took off his backpack, unzipped a bag and showed me 3 small trinkets he had brought with him. Then he explained, "I'm going to make sure you don't go through here," Tom said, and ran to the graves. Meanwhile, Marcon passed me a scarf and ordered, "Put this on so you can't look." I listened obediently, covered my eyes with the scarf and stood there waiting while they laughed and finished whatever they were doing for the next challenge. About 10 minutes later, they told me to take off my scarf. "All right, Stephanie, you have those 3 items somewhere in the tombs. You have 3 minutes to find them and bring them here," James said and laughed. "It's Stephen." I corrected him without even realizing he was making fun of my name. James pushed me towards the graves and set a timer. I hurried to look for any clues that might help. I knew Malcolm wouldn't have made it easy, but I looked for the obvious signs, like the grass pressed down by his footsteps and the marks of his shoes on the headstones. In this way, it was easy to find the first one, which was located in a bush behind a large gravestone. I followed the same clues to find the others, running back to them with the 3 trinkets in hand once again ahead of time. All 3 were angry now, and I didn't understand why. This was all just preparation for the ultimate challenge. No one has ever passed it, so if you do, you'll be legendary, James spoke. He led me towards a part of the cemetery that had slightly fewer headstones. I recognized the area because this was where my dad was buried. Then James pointed to an open hole. I looked down and saw a wooden coffin placed at the bottom of the dirt hole, probably in preparation for an upcoming funeral. I immediately felt dizzy, even before James explained what the challenge was. "Get in there, and we'll bury you. If you can break the record of 6 minutes underground, you'll be in our club for life," James explained to me. "Do you want me to go in there?" I asked, looking down into the narrow space. "Well, we could call the whole thing off if you want," he said, kicking some gravel. "No," I quickly interjected. I was so desperate for his acceptance, I wasn't even able to assess danger. I think I got in the hole before another word was said. Then I said, "I'll show you I can make it 10 minutes," I said excitedly. The guys shared a mischievous look with each other and ordered me to lie down against the ground. I did as I was told, waiting while they placed the cover on the coffin. Then I heard the shovels and dirt piling up. I closed my eyes and tried not to panic. "I can do this, I can do this," I repeated to myself over and over to give myself encouragement. My whole body was shaking and I tried to stay as still as I could. Finally, there was silence. I shouted and asked if they were done, but got no answer. I waited a minute or so, trying to think if I had passed the record, but I was also starting to feel that the oxygen in the wooden box was running out. I waited a few more minutes and started banging the lid really hard, yelling that I was ready to get out. I never knew what it was like to be claustrophobic until then, but they were not responding. More time passed. I was sure it had been at least 20 minutes. The coffin felt cold and very dark. I hadn't realized how dark it was at first because I had tried to ignore it. Now it was all I could see. The space felt too overwhelming and I began to scream, struggling to stay awake. My body was shaking. I could feel myself struggling to breathe. Finally, I was on the verge of passing out and felt the air escape from my lungs. I was sure that I was going to die. The next thing I knew, I was in my mother's arms. I was so dazed I couldn't remember anything. She took me home and brought me some hot soup. My mother scolded me for drinking so much that I became unconscious. I looked at her completely confused. What was she talking about? She told me that my sister had brought me home with her boyfriend while in a terrible state of half unconsciousness. My mother told me that she was very disappointed in me for engaging in that kind of behavior and that I wasn't old enough to drink yet. From the things my mother was saying, it seems that my sister told her that she had gone to pick me up at a party where she was with some friends. I didn't say anything, I just nodded and apologized. I barely slept that night. I kept feeling that the moment I fell asleep, I would be trapped again. In fact, I had problems for years after that incident. I would wake up tearing at my mattress and in cold sweats. I had horrible nightmares of that cemetery for years. The next day I left the house determined to confront the trio, but first, I ran into my sister in the hallway and asked her about what had happened that night and how she had found me. She told me that when she saw that it was getting late and I wasn't arriving, she called her boyfriend and told him to take her to the cemetery to look for me. She told me that she and her boyfriend had been looking for me for a while, but she had no idea where I might be. It was then that she saw 3 boys coming out of the place, laughing and making jokes, and she asked them if they had seen me. But they looked at each other in a complicit manner, shook their heads and went on their way. However, for some reason, she and her boyfriend decided to walk back to where they came from, and that's when they started hearing my screams. My sister told me that they followed the sound for a few seconds until they reached the place where they had buried me and were horrified to realize that the screams were coming from under the ground, but all of a sudden they died down. Her boyfriend started digging quickly until he hit the shovel with the coffin, and that's when they were able to rescue me. She told me that I was very lucky that they had arrived at the right time and that the earth was still loose, which meant that her boyfriend was able to dig very quickly. After explaining this to me, she also had questions. Logically, she wanted to know what happened to make me end up buried alive. However, I didn't want to give her any further explanation. I just told her that I would tell her later, and I stormed out of the house, ready to find the trio of ruffians and tell them their truths. I got to the gym where they always met and confronted them about it. "What graveyard? What are you talking about, stranger boy? You must be crazy. We would never go out there," said James, as he shared a mocking look with his cronies. "Yeah, besides, we wouldn't play those kind of stupid games. You're a psycho," Malcolm commented, while Tom just flashed a very cynical half-smile. Their mischievous smiles and attitude told me all I needed to know. They had left me there to die on purpose. I never wanted to accuse them or call the police, but that day I learned an important lesson, and since then I decided to change my life. I realized that all along I had been looking up to a trio of assholes, but more importantly, I realized that I was no different from them. I was also a complete asshole, and I almost paid with my life for being one. Fortunately, that experience helped me to start walking the path of righteousness and doing better things with my life, so much so that I graduated with the best GPA in my high school, and today I am a medical student at a local university. However, I still have those same horrible nightmares and worry that one day when I die, I will be trapped in that place forever. Hi, my name is Anthony, and I'm a YouTuber who is dedicated to showcasing serial killers and government conspiracies. Obviously, I won't tell you the name of my channel because I'm already a pretty big YouTuber, and I don't need to draw that kind of attention among my followers. To tell you the truth, I feel a little uncomfortable telling you this story, because there might be something very dangerous loose out there. At the time it all happened, I was only 19 years old. It was my first videos as an urban explorer, but I knew I had the support of my friends and other urban horror explorers with much more established YouTube channels than mine. They were the ones who recommended starting my own YouTube channel, and since I was a very charismatic kid, they thought I would probably do well, but I would have to make really good content from the beginning, and they would help me do that. That same Saturday, we planned to do an urban exploration in a cemetery. Even though I had a caretaker, the cemetery was really big and my friends were convinced that we could make good content with it. So we all prepared to go to the cemetery that night. All my friends had a lot of subscribers, and during that night they were going to be filming a video for their YouTube channels, which also played in my favor, as they were going to name me in the video asking their subscribers to follow me. I was very excited. That night was going to be my big night. At that moment, there was no way I could have imagined that my big night would turn into my worst nightmare. Before the exploration began, we all met at Ephraim's house for pizza. He had the biggest channel of all, and was the one who made the equipment to start the exploration. I hadn't known Ephraim for 6 months, but during that time we became quite close. Once the time was right, we all went to the place. It was large and we knew that the guard spent most of his time at the front gate. The rest of the cemetery was covered by walls and big wires, but the cemetery was very old and neglected. So many of these wires were broken. We started to put our cameras and recorders through the holes, and then went in ourselves one by one, until the 4 of us were done. It only took us a few minutes to be inside the cemetery. Honestly, I didn't know much about the place and always fantasized about exploring it at night. I thought it was going to be fun, since we were going to be among friends, and it would take some of the tension out of the whole situation of being in a cemetery. But the opposite happened. We were all very scared. There was a very strange aura, as if something was wrong, as if we were disturbing something we had no business disturbing. We kept walking around the place, shining the light on the terrifying graves. The cemetery looked destroyed and many of the mausoleums were broken, revealing sarcophagi and wilted flowers. My friends kept walking, ignoring most of the graves. They looked determined, as if they knew where they were going. However, it was Ephraim's attitude that caught my attention the most. He looked scared but was still determined and moved ahead of everyone. Suddenly, they all stopped at a huge mausoleum. "Well guys, here we are. What's here?" I asked Ephraim. "Didn't we tell you? We didn't just come to explore a destroyed cemetery, dude. This is the grave of a boy who was brutally murdered leaving school. Normally, his parents would look for him because he lived far away, but that day the boy was leaving early and his parents forgot that, as I said, he lived far from home. But he wanted to walk there anyway. He didn't feel like waiting for his parents and he didn't mind going through dangerous places, and that's when..." Ephraim didn't finish telling the story because something else caught our attention. "What the hell is that?" said Greg. We all turned to look. There was something... Someone peered out from the mausoleum, a black shadow. We all took a few steps back, very scared, but with our camera up. "Hey, you should come closer," Ephraim said. "Why would I do that?" I replied. "You're the new guy, you should get closer," another replied. I hate to admit it, but they were right. They trusted me to be part of the team. They were going to recommend my channel and make me grow, so the least I could do was encourage me to be like them. I slowly approached the mausoleum, and as I did, I felt that something I shouldn't play with was in front of me. But I didn't care. I just turned off my brain and kept walking, terrified, but with a courage I never had before. I pointed the camera inside the mausoleum, and there it was. "Guys, there's nothing here." When I turned around, I got no response, but everyone was looking at me with a look of absolute panic on their faces. I turned around again, and there was a strange figure looking straight at me. It was a girl, but she was dressed as a bride. Her face was completely white, and it was very scary. Her body was full of blood. I wanted to run, but I was involuntarily paralyzed, and I was aware that I could not move. The girl ran towards me, and all I could do was close my eyes because panic made every muscle in my body contract, and I was not able to take a step. I just stood there, full of fear, waiting for whatever had to happen. But suddenly there was silence. This silence lasted for a few seconds, until I heard something else. Was it laughter? When I opened my eyes, all my friends were laughing loudly. The girl in front of me didn't look so threatening anymore. She was laughing too. Sons of... I didn't want to finish the sentence out of respect for the audience, but boy did I think it out in all its letters. It wasn't a ghost, a zombie, or a demon. It was Ephraim's girlfriend. The cameraman also laughed out loud as he continued filming. At that moment, I understood everything that was going on. This wasn't about me, was it, you guys? You guys aren't doing this to help me. You just want to upload the videos to your channels and make everyone laugh at me, I said, feeling very stupid and also betrayed. Oh, come on, you really thought we considered you that important? You're a cowardly, talentless kid, whatever. There's no way you're going to become as famous as us. Then Greg stepped in and laughingly said to me, Hey, don't be so hard on Ephraim, and don't be so hard on us either. This will help you too. You see, everybody, they may laugh at you now, but this will bring you a lot of visitors. People will love you for being a wimp. Isn't that what works on YouTube? I walked towards him with every intention of punching him, but something made me stop. There was a shadow behind him. As everyone continued to taunt me, an adult approached Ephraim from behind, attacking him with a huge machete. Ephraim narrowly dodged it and we all started to run, but the man threw the machete at us and to my bad luck it stuck in my leg. All my friends stood there looking at me nervously. I know they could have reached me. I know they could have helped me, but they didn't even try. They all ran away in desperation, escaping from the cemetery and leaving me lying there at the mercy of the man with the machete. A few seconds later, the man was at my side, reclaiming his machete that was stuck in my leg. The wound was not serious, but it left me totally immobilized. I tried to crawl before the eyes of this terrifying man, but without mercy, he began stomping on my head and flipping it from side to side as if I were a cockroach. So you like pranks, you like to laugh at the dead, don't you? You like to film yourself and then laugh. I tried to reply that I had nothing to do with it, but every time I tried to speak, the man stepped on my head harder and sunk it into the ground. I saw how your little friends were filming and laughing. Did you know there is a dead girl there? My wife's grave is just a few meters away. Would you make fun of her too? The man said, full of fury. He raised his machete, ready to bury it in my skull, but as I took my last breath, the least expected help arrived. The security guard shouted at him to let me go, and suddenly, the two men began to fight. Although he was doing his best to save me, it was easy to see that the security guard was losing the fight. The psychopath was able to take him down easily, and on top of that, beat him brutally, so mustering all my strength, I jumped towards the psychopath and with the last bit of my remaining energy, bit him on the ankle as hard as I could. Faced with this distraction, the guard hit him with a rock and the psychopath disappeared on the spot. The police arrived shortly thereafter and were horrified by the crime scene. The man was arrested for attempted murder, and to this day has still not been released from jail, nor do I believe he ever will be. As for me, I never heard from my so-called friends again. They blocked me from all social networks and never spoke to me again. On the other hand, I did make one friend, the security guard at the cemetery. He saved my life, and from time to time I would visit him until I moved. On those visits, he told me all about the psychopath. Apparently, I had seen him several days earlier sneaking into the cemetery at night with this huge machete, looking for unsuspecting victims to attack. His true identity was never known, but soon after, he confessed that his wife was not buried there. He didn't even have a wife. The only thing that became clear to me is that you don't know who you might run into or what things they are going to do to you on any given day. I stopped being afraid of the dead since that night. Now I know that the living scare me more. Hi, my name is Paul, and for several years I have worked in a cemetery. Throughout my years here, I have worked both day and night shifts. I am now 57 years old, and have also trained some newcomers to work here. So today, instead of telling you one scary story about the cemetery I work in, I am going to tell you two. When I first started working at this cemetery, a year after graduation, I started taking the night shift. The shift would start around 4 p.m. and end at midnight, since the cemetery closed at 6 p.m. I would usually close the gate at the end of the shift. I would usually close the main gate at 5:30 and then drive through the cemetery in a golf cart, informing visitors that we were closing and they needed to leave. During my shift, I had seen and experienced many strange things, but I never paid much attention to those things. I believe you attract what you focus on, and I didn't want that. No way do I want to bring those energies closer to me, so even though I experienced these things, I never told my friends or family, especially my wife Edith, who would be scared to death if she ever knew what I got to experience here. She is a sweet woman and loves me dearly, so every night around 8 p.m., Edith would bring me a hot dinner so I could be refueled to make it through the rest of the day's hours. Seeing her every night with a basket full of my dinner was the best part of my day back then. One night after dinner, I was walking Edith to her car. We didn't have children then, but she was pregnant. As we were a few feet from the car, Edith simply stopped dead in her tracks and turned around abruptly. "Honey, what's wrong?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," she replied. "I think I caught my hair on a branch or something." "Honey, we're nowhere near any trees. They're at least 20 yards away from us," I insisted, "so tell me what happened." This seemed to make her more uneasy. "Paul, I felt like someone moved a hand on my head back and forth and then pulled my ponytail," she said, big tears welling up in her eyes. I knew she was about to panic. "Listen to me, baby, why don't you go home now? I'll see you in a few hours." She just nodded and pulled out of the parking lot as fast as she had ever driven. I had never seen my wife drive like that in her entire life, not even when her sister's water broke and she had to rush to take her to the hospital to deliver her niece. After that day, I had to say goodbye to hot dinners, as Edith never stopped the cemetery again. But in a way, it was better that way. The last thing I wanted was for my wife to have a nervous breakdown from having to experience the same things I did. The next story was about my first day on the job at the cemetery. As a newcomer, I was given the morning shift, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. I still remember walking into the cemetery for the first time. It was a beautiful day with the sun's rays peeking gently through the tops of the huge trees. Although the sun had already risen, it was still quite early, so instead of sitting and waiting for the older workers to show me the ropes, I decided to take a walk through the cemetery myself. At the time, I had just moved to town and had no idea of the history of the cemetery. To me, it felt like a walk in the park, but before I could leave, a girl arrived. She was also new there, and it was her first day as well. We both applied for this job after seeing the ad in the local paper, so I asked her if she would like to go for a walk with me in the cemetery. I don't remember her name right now, but let's call her Clara. Clara agreed to go on the walk with me, and, not knowing much, we walked into an area with many mausoleums. As we walked deeper into the cemetery just chatting, we saw a guy who was old, with gray hair peeking out from under his peculiar hat, even dressed strangely, like people from the 1940s. He was leaning against an old tombstone and looking at a couple of graves in front of him, and the strangest part of it all was the fact that he was drinking coffee from a cup, but not just any cup, but a ceramic cup that I could recognize right away, because my grandmother used to have ones just like it in her kitchen when I was a kid and came to visit her. These were handmade by a local maker who died in the 50s, and they are extremely rare to find, and even more so in such a good condition as that one, which looked like new, which caught my attention a lot because since the craftsman who made them passed away, they were never sold again. As Clara and I walked along, we waved to him and he smiled and waved back. The moment we turned a corner, we both looked at each other and exchanged a strange look. "Didn't that gentleman seem a little strange to you?" Clara asked me. "Yes, definitely," I replied. "And what's with those old-fashioned clothes and the coffee cup?" That's when Clara decided to look back, and to our surprise, the man wasn't there. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. We both looked at each other again, but simply shrugged and continued our walk. When we got back to the main office, we decided to tell a superior what we had seen. The guy smiled and asked me if the man we saw was leaning against a mausoleum, dressed in old clothes and had a quaint mug in his hand. When we nodded, he smiled some more and said, "Oh, that's our ghost. He's been seen in the same place many times by many different people. He's not hurting anyone. He's just smiling and waving at them, so don't worry." After hearing the very casual way our superior approached the matter, Clara quit the job immediately, even before it started, but I decided to stay and take it. It turns out that the ghost we saw earlier was of a man who had died in the early 1940s. He was buried there along with his family, a wife and 2 daughters. The 3 of them died a couple of years before him in a fire that hit the town, and people say that he used to visit their graves every day. And even after his own death, he still visited his family's graves, as when he was alive. On Halloween 2018, my friends and I were feeling the spooky vibes of the month and wanted to do something fun and exciting to satisfy our thirst for scary stuff. Being the goofy college freshmen that we were, we decided to explore some supposedly haunted location in hopes of seeing some real paranormal activity. And what could be scarier and have more possible paranormal activity than a cemetery? So it didn't take too much deliberation to know that would be the place we would go. Once the sun had set and night had fallen, we set off to sneak into the local cemetery after it closed, to get the full experience and without having to worry about any other visitors. I must admit that I had always wanted to do something like this before, but I was really afraid of what might await us in that cemetery so late at night. Stories always circulated around the various apparitions people had encountered before, sounds that chilled them to the bone, ghosts making their presence known, and so on. Anyway, this was something I came fully prepared for. It was a pleasantly long trip, but I really wasn't in the mood to think about anything else except for the possible horrors that roamed the cemetery for all eternity, or so they say. And of course, on the exciting fact that we were going to be trespassing in the cemetery in the first place. I was a nervous wreck, but my friends were apparently doing a much better job of keeping their fears in check, although, for the sake of the story, I'll call them Logan, Mark, and Eddie. The whole car ride there they were laughing and joking, not worrying about the possible mess we'd be getting into or what we might find in that place. Looking back on the whole situation, I should have known that their optimism was a bad sign. There was no way we could have scouted that place without them being a little nervous, but what's done is done. A little after 7 o'clock, once the sun had fallen and darkness occupied every direction as far as the eye could see, we finally arrived. Parking in the main parking lot was completely out of the question because we did some research prior to our little foray and discovered that in previous years, the local police liked to wait there to catch any would-be explorers before they could get in. So we had a backup plan. The Royal Cemetery was located in the center of a dense forest that surrounded it on all sides, essentially forming a square where all roads circled it, so we were only to park at a restaurant that was open very late and had a huge parking lot in the back. We were to park in a way that we were farthest away from the restaurant itself and closest to the road. This was exactly in the opposite direction from the main entrance to the cemetery, so we figured this was our best chance to get in while avoiding the cops on our way. From there, we would cross the road on foot and walk a bit before reaching the somewhat hidden path leading into the woods. Taking this back path would take us a bit longer to get to the cemetery itself, as there were particularly thick and dense trees, but it was worth it when considering the alternative. After all was said and done, we found ourselves starting our hike along the agreed-upon trail, unsure how far we would actually have to walk before we found what we were looking for. This was a very windy night, and although it wasn't too cold or anything, I still remember my teeth chattering and my skin getting cold with every step. Aside from the occasional sounds of leaves crunching under our shoes as we walked, it was dead silent. My friends, who were once very cheerful and enthusiastic, suddenly seemed too quiet, calm and not at all euphoric as you could observe them in the car. Logan, in particular, had this strange expression on his face every time I shined my phone's flashlight on his face. It was a sort of cross between fear and pain, as if every step he took was causing him physical harm. But before I could question him about it, we finally found ourselves at our destination. Here we were in the heart of the city cemetery, with a pile of graves all around us and a certain chill in the air. At that point, we all split up to cover more ground, promising to call the others if they came across anything. I didn't want us to get too far away from each other, but I also didn't want to look like a whiny baby asking not to be left alone, so I kept my mouth shut and started exploring. Most of the graves I looked at had withered over time in the open, so I couldn't really make out anything on the headstones. The few dates I could read dated back to the late 1800s, and a chilling feeling in my stomach began to form once I realized that these people had been dead and decaying in the ground for over 100 years. Feeling extremely uncomfortable with this realization, I had begun to move away from the graves and started looking around for my friends to see if they had found anything supernatural. And I was at it, when suddenly I heard it, and not just me, but everyone else heard it as well. It was a bass, almost imperceptible if you weren't paying attention, but with the way our senses were heightened, there was no way we were going to miss it. It seemed to be some sort of chant, and sounded like it was coming from a little north of our direction, farther out in a clearing that could be seen up ahead. I couldn't make out any of the words being spoken, or even if it was in some other language, but there was something eerie about the tone, as if it was religious and the chanting was some sort of prayer. The voice that was chanting was deep and gravelly. Clearly it was a man we couldn't see. The four of us flashed our lights at each other to see our expressions, and at that moment we knew what we were going to do. Even though every fiber of my being told me to go no further and not even think of going to see what the source of this singing was, my curiosity got the better of me and I couldn't resist. Eddie whispered to us to turn off his lights completely, while dimming his just enough so that it wouldn't attract too much attention, but we would still be able to see with it. The next few moments we spent creeping silently toward the strange noise. The closer we got, the more uncontrollable my breathing became, and it felt like my heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. I was very afraid of what we would find there, yet I was still very curious as to what it was. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we had entered the clearing. We were only a few steps away from this singing, so Eddie shone his light in the direction ahead of us, and for a brief moment, we saw a figure wrapped in some sort of cloak, something on the grass, still singing in that unrecognizable language. The thing in the grass looked like some kind of circle with a mark in the center, and I swear to God I wish I could tell you I was lying about this, but when I realized what the symbol was, I felt like throwing up. I was not mistaken. It was a pentagram made of some strange material. By the time Eddie had illuminated the view in front of us, I had been able to get a glimpse of the pentagram material. It was thick and bright red, and honestly, it didn't look like paint. So the first thing that came to my mind is the same thing you are thinking, blood. Once the light from Eddie's phone hit the back of the man's head, he immediately stopped singing and stood still looking in the direction of the pentagram, and the next few minutes I can only describe as terror of the purest kind. Before we knew it, the man, who had the upper half of his body naked and covered in a bunch of strange symbols, let out a blood-curdling scream that shook us to the core, and then turned around, starting to run towards us. It all happened so fast that I couldn't even make out the man's facial features except for his sunken eyes, and an expression that radiated pure hatred. It didn't take much analysis to realize that he really wanted to hurt us, so without wasting any time, we all fled back in the direction we had come from and ran as fast as any of us had ever run in our entire lives. I couldn't even scream as I ran. I was too petrified to make any sound. Perhaps it was a miracle, but somehow we managed to retrace our steps exactly, all the way back the way we had come to enter the cemetery through the woods, and finally came out onto the main road, which was devoid of traffic for the moment. Fearful of what we might see if we looked back, we headed straight for the car and immediately got in, locked the car doors and rolled up the windows. We were out of there in no time and didn't stop driving about 20 times over the allowable speed limits until we were at least several miles away. Honestly, I have no idea how far or how long that man chased us, but I do know this for sure. We weren't supposed to be there that night and must have been interrupting something important he was doing. I will never know what it was, and honestly, I don't expect to ever find out. We never spoke of this experience again after that night, and never took another trip to some abandoned or haunted location. I think that scare was more than enough to satisfy our curiosity of spooky things for the rest of our lives, and I am grateful beyond words that we all made it out together and alive. Every night, Precisely at 3 a.m., he appears with a flash of light in the darkness of the cemetery and brings back the dead from their graves. If you make a deal with him, he would take away what you hold most dear. Signed by the necromancer. I read it on a wall as I walked through the town cemetery. There was a contact number and location below the misspelled note. Definitely, these days when people will do anything for money, I whispered to myself. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but I took a picture of that note and posted it on Instagram, and that's how it all started. My name is Diana. I'm a 25-year-old chef, and I work at a 5-star hotel in Boston. I'm always busy with my job, so I don't have a lot of time for dating. But I had been in love with my best friend Tyler since we were kids. He was tall, handsome, and had a sweet smile. He was also very kind and a brilliant lawyer. In short, he was perfect for me. However, he had a girlfriend, no wonder. Her name was Layla. They looked good together, truth be told, but I couldn't help that it made me sad. But one night, Tyler came up to me and said, Layla and I broke up. Obviously, I didn't show him, but that news made my stomach tingle. He started crying, and I couldn't say anything at the time because I'm really bad at faking it, and he would realize that I didn't feel sorry for that at all, beyond the fact that it always broke my heart to see him cry. But I was happy and relieved that he was now single. Not that I want him to like me or anything, but seeing him with someone else used to hurt a little. I know that sounds selfish and greedy of me, but it was how I felt, and I'd be lying if I said otherwise. We were standing in my front yard at the time, and my mom had just come home from work. Then she said, "Hey guys, good to see you, Tyler. Shall we have dinner together?" I replied, "Mom, I don't think Tyler can join us today." But as I was talking, he interrupted me and said, "Of course, I'll eat you guys. I'm starving. I alone had a hamburger for lunch, so I could use it." And he smiled at me, so we headed inside. Tyler lives near my house, and our parents are good friends, which is why he and I have always been so close. After dinner, my mom asked him if he was okay. Tyler nodded and told my mom he had to go. He thanked her for the meal and left. The next day on my way to work, I saw Tyler and Layla standing in front of their house. They seemed to be arguing for some reason, but I didn't want to stop. The least I wanted to do was look like I was gossiping or nosy, so I kept walking and acted like I didn't see anything. When I got to work, my superior scolded me a couple of times for being distracted. I couldn't concentrate on cooking, it was a mess. And I still couldn't stop thinking that I had seen them together again, even if they were arguing, because that meant that there was a possibility that they might come back. After I finished my work, before going back home, I took out my phone and started reading the news as I always do, also a little bit to stop thinking about Tyler and Layla. But then I saw a news that caught my attention a lot, because it was very recent. It was about a girl who committed suicide by drinking poison. So I opened this article, and when I saw the picture of the dead girl, I froze. It was Layla. On the way home, I called Tyler and asked if we could meet, but he didn't say anything and hung up, so I didn't insist. Later I called him again, and also the next day, but he didn't answer. So I decided to respect his grief and didn't bother him for a few days. In those days, I went to work and came home to sleep as usual, but deep in my heart, I was hoping to get a call from him. A couple of days later, my shift changed to the night shift, and one day, when I was coming home from work, Tyler called me and said, "Can you come to the cemetery near our location?" After a long pause, I replied, "Yes, why not?" I was surprised to hear it, as it was the same cemetery where I saw the note engraved on the wall. It felt weird and creepy, but it was Tyler who called me, so I decided to go. It felt a little weird that he summoned me to that place. My first thought was that maybe he wanted to visit Layla's grave and maybe do something like a farewell ritual, or he just needed a friendly shoulder to mourn her departure. The problem is that as far as I knew, that wasn't the cemetery where she was buried. However, I left the doubts for when I was there. When I arrived at the cemetery, I called Taylor to ask him exactly where it was. Then he gave me the directions to the exact spot where it was, which was quite far from the entrance, almost reaching the forest that delimits the cemetery. I did as he told me, but no one prepared me for what I found there. As I arrived, I saw 3 men dressed in black robes and Tyler sitting on the ground. I hesitated to approach, but I plucked up my courage and moved on. After I got there, I asked my friend what this was all about and who these people were. His answer shocked me. He told me that these people were the ones who would bring Layla back. I was speechless for a moment, thinking how wrong my friend was to think that was possible. I looked at the men behind him, who remained silent the entire time. In light of my silence, Tyler explained that he missed Layla a lot and saw my Instagram post, so he called the number below the note. "Don't tell me you did that dumb thing, Taylor?" He frowned and told me it wasn't dumb at all, and that if there was anything he could do to bring Layla back, he wouldn't hesitate to do it. So I said to him, "And what did you want me to come for? You know I don't believe in these things." He gave me a look that I didn't know how to decipher at the time, and then he said, "I'm sorry, Grace," with a halo of guilt in his eyes. I didn't know specifically what his words meant, but I started to feel scared, so I turned around and tried to run away. But then I tripped over something on the floor and almost fell, and when I saw what it was, I almost had a heart attack. There was a dead body lying on the floor. It was Layla's corpse. At that moment, my body began to tremble and I was petrified with shock. But before I could do anything, someone knocked me down, covered my mouth and nose with a handkerchief, and I began to lose consciousness. The last thing I saw was Tyler dragging Layla's corpse back to a coffin. Then he said, "Necromancer, please bring back my girlfriend. I already brought you the sacrifice." One of the masked men came up and said something in his ear, while the other two attacked Tyler from behind. I lost consciousness after that. When I came to, I was in a truck and my hands and legs were tied. I saw that Tyler was next to me in the same situation, but he was bleeding from the forehead. My head was hurting badly and I was struggling to free my hands and feet. Then I saw that Tyler also started to regain consciousness. The truck came to a screeching halt and I heard the sound of footsteps coming towards us. I whispered to Tyler, "Close your eyes and don't let them know you're awake." He nodded his head and we both acted as if we were unconscious. A man came and checked us over and then called the other man over using some pretty foul language. They put us on a stretcher and took us inside a building. That place was cold and smelled strongly of medicine. That's when we realized what was going on. Even though we pretended to be unconscious, the men strapped us to the gurneys, then took us to an operating room and a doctor came through the door, putting on a pair of gloves and preparing to operate. Judging from their previous conversation, I knew they were going to harvest our organs to sell them on the black market. I panicked and was about to start screaming, but at that moment I began to hear a familiar sound that filled me with hope. It was the police siren coming from a distance. All the people around us started to run. That's when I opened my eyes completely, and I saw the door of the operating room burst open, and a group of men dressed in black assault uniforms with guns in their hands entered the place. A police officer came in and asked me, "Are you okay, miss? Can you walk?" I said yes, and he released my restraints. As soon as I was released, I ran outside and looked for Tyler. He was sitting near an ambulance receiving first aid for his injury. After receiving a medical examination and giving my statement to the police, I was escorted home by them. On our way home, I was told that the group known as Necromancer was a criminal group that had been on my heels for some time. These people tricked people into believing that they could bring back their loved ones if they sacrificed a living person, whether it was someone close to them and who they wanted, was something they did out of pure evil, as the ultimate goal was simply to steal the organs of both the contracting party and the person being sacrificed. Tyler apologized to me for what he had done and excused himself by saying that he was going through a time of great pain, and the thought of bringing Layla back simply blinded him. But there was no apology for the fact that he wanted to take my life to bring back his dead girlfriend. Knowing that he was willing to sacrifice me like that was really very painful for me, especially because I was in love with him, and even though I knew that love was unrequited, I really thought that his friendship was sincere, but this proved that it was not, because I would never have done the same with him. After that, I didn't want to retaliate against Tyler in any way, but I asked him to stay out of my life as much as possible. And to this day I have never spoken to him again, even though he lives 2 houses away from me.